Well, first things first. So I know that certainly a lot of the research that I've seen and kind of some of the stuff that I forwarded earlier just deals with how well prepared kids' brains are for the dopamine hit, the rush that social media provides, that gaming provides, that screens provide, et cetera.
Yeah, the brain doesn't finish, the frontal lobe isn't fully developed until around age 25. And so we know that as children are growing, their brains are kind of pruning and deciding which connections to keep and which to lose. And so they also, because the frontal lobe's not fully developed, that is the center for reasoning, judgment, decision making, kind of inhibition, being able to choose whether to stop something, or to kind of be able to avoid giving in to kind of repetitive behaviors. So anything kind of prior to that, that's why you see like teenagers make bad decisions notoriously, right? Because they don't have that fully developed prefrontal cortex. So when it comes to introducing things like technology, games, social media, using a lot of screens, it's just something we have to be aware of. I think it's really interesting that we're learning more and more. The research, because a lot of this is so new, we haven't seen, what that looks like generationally as they turn into adults and what happens. But I can speak to, what that screen time is then affecting in terms of other things like attention and focus, or then disrupting things like sleep, which are really critical, or taking the place of physical activity or in-person social connection. So I think it's a combination of both what they're doing on the device itself, as well as what it may be preventing them from doing instead, or kind of getting in the way. And then in other instances, disrupting, say, attention or focus just based on their type of use. So I think my general stance is that we're not, at least at the Center for Brain Health, we're not completely pro or against technology. It's a tool, just like everything else. It's how you use it. And so to emphasize that, it really depends on the content, the context. And so I think there are a lot of great ways that parents can set up some nice guardrails or boundaries for themselves and their families, to really protect that, and so that they can really support their children as their brains are developing.
I mean, I feel like this could be a 45-minute, hour-long deep dive, which we A, don't have time for, and B, I don't want to do that too today. But I just find this kind of riveting because there's so many ways you can slice this up, because you've got screens in general, right? Passive viewing of a screen, you're watching a show on a device. We've had that in TVs going back, decades, right? I think the ubiquitousness of it is just extra struggle for parents, that you've got it on devices. You go out to dinner, you see kids with iPads at the table, and without passing any judgment on that practice, you just see them in more places. And then you got social media that has an interactivity, and you're scrolling, and it's a constant feed of new information. There's not a narrative. It's tweet, Instagram picture, like, and the dopamine hit. And then of course gaming has the interactive component as well. So I kind of want to split these out. Do you see the research telling you different levels of effect based on different types of consumption on a screen?
Sure. I mean, I think it depends too. Again, there's research to support almost any side you want to take. So there's plenty of studies that show the benefits of, say, video games, right? And certain types of specific cognitive processes that may help with things like attention, or working memory, those types of things. I do think that there is typically this sort of dose response curve, right? So the more you're doing something, and also the way that the brain works is that the more you repeat a behavior, we have the saying, what fires together wires together. So the stronger those connections become, and the more ingrained that habit loop becomes. So when it's like, even just the habit of, for example, oh, I'm waiting in line, I'm going to grab my phone, right? Like, instead of just letting your mind wander, which is also really important for the brain. So I know that, that's another thing of just allowing children to be bored, allowing them to have downtime, allowing them, that's where that really fosters creativity. And so that's a really important piece, and not just for children, but also for adults throughout our day, to build in periods of space, of no input, so the brain can actually rest and the default mode network can activate.
Hmm. I think that's interesting, because you bring up the habit that certainly a lot of adults have fallen into, myself included. You stand in line, you pull out the phone. You're at any point where you need to wait, the phone comes out. What are some other examples of that, things that are wired together, stay together, fired together, that you mentioned when it applies to kids?
Yeah, so I think, getting them in the habit of even just like you said, the infinite scroll. It's kind of they've played on that same addictive mechanism of like a slot machine in Vegas, right? And so it's kind of like you pull down and you win the lottery to see, or even like refreshing your email. That doesn't apply to kids as much. But yeah, waiting to see like, is there a new notification? Did I get a new like? Do I have a new friend request? How many views did my video get? It's kind of this, this repetitive behavior where we're kind of waiting to see, and then like you mentioned, get that dopamine hit. And so that's a reinforced behavior then that can just become habit. And it's the type of thing where even so, like I keep my notifications off because I don't like being interrupted. That's another tip, kind of silencing those and having designated time when you can go check those applications to kind of put up as guardrails for children. But yeah, that I'll find myself, even though I know that I don't have the notifications on, I'll go check, right. And it's kind of that habitual wanting to just go and see, I'm going to go back into that app and see if I missed anything or if there's anything new. So just kind of that's kind of the repetitive nature of that.
So could you list off just some of the things that you're seeing with exposure to, you mentioned the endless scroll, the dopamine hit, the likes, because given that this is again a shorter piece, I want to try to, kind of condense down, kind of almost like a bullet point list of what we're seeing in kids' brains.
Yeah. So I think probably the biggest few things are interrupting attention and focus, because there's constantly new pings, constantly something to look at, and also distractions of the TV's on in the background. There's different things competing for your attention. So it makes it really hard. The brain you have is the brain you've built. So if you're training that young brain to constantly be interrupted, it's going to be really hard to sustain focus for a long period of time. So I think that attention focus is a big piece. I think the second thing is really interrupting creativity, boredom, mind wandering, daydreaming. That's really important for a healthy brain, for problem solving and just creativity, like I said. And then on the latter, the use of screens would get in the way of physical activity, in-person social connections, and disrupt sleep. And those are so important for a developing brain. Those are like absolutely essential. And so if that is interfering with that, that can be really detrimental.
What about the addictive aspect of it? Like now it's like, I have to have it. I can't go someplace without my device. I can't eat dinner without my device in front of me. I've got to play games. I've got to scroll Instagram, the addictive aspect.
Yes, it is addicting. However, you have the ability to, like I said, the brain you have is a brain you've built, but you can rebuild a new brain and it will take a little bit of work, but it's kind of having limits around that and determining these are the times that I do this. And it is hard. You're going to find yourself wanting that, or, the kids are going to want to do more of that. But I think having just designated, this is the time of day where screens are away. This is the time of day when screens come out, and really being protective around what that looks like. Because I think when it's free reign is when it really takes over. And children in particular don't have that ability to really kind of discern for themselves. So that's where they really need the help of a parent or caregiver.
Well, so that's interesting, because basically what we're saying is not only are kids more susceptible to some of the ill effects of devices, screens, media, et cetera, but they don't have the capability to regulate it. So it's not just that they don't have the the effect it has on them, but they're not strong enough to counteract that effect themselves.
Yes. So one of the beautiful things about a pediatric brain or children is that there is incredible neuroplasticity, more than when we're adults. So to take advantage of that, and knowing that if you have wired a bad habit, that you can rewire a new one, and just simply by reinforcing that new behavior. And it really comes down to, it's the reward system at the end of the day. So making sure that, the benefit or kind of the pleasure that's experienced from that rewarding interaction of being in person with people or doing something instead of screens, when they can experience that can help to rewire that habit.
If you're a parent, what should you be on the lookout for to indicate to you, hey, you know what, maybe my son or daughter is spending a little bit too much time on social media, on devices, gaming, etc.?
Yeah, I think if they're spending more time kind of looking at the ratio, and it's different for every family and every child, but I think a good general rule of thumb is to see, is this getting in the way of spending time outside? Is this getting in the way of spending time in person with family or friends? Is this getting in the way of reading and schoolwork? Is this interrupting physical activity? Is this interrupting sleep? I think taking note of any one of those things, it's like, okay, it's probably time to pull back a little bit, because without those elements, it's really hard to stay healthy and stay balanced. And so, and like we talked about earlier, they're not able to do that on their own. So I think noticing, hey, is this getting in the way of any of these number of things? It's probably time to pull back.
I do want to go back real quickly to social media specifically, because I remember hearing, I think a pediatrician making the statement that, of the things he would never let his kids do, one of them was have a social media account. And I think there's a fine line where look, we live in a digital world. Having access to the social media networks has some positive effects in terms of this is the digital version of the mall that maybe someone my age would have grown up going to. So I don't know that I'm not asking you to make that kind of an assessment, but do you feel like social media specifically takes advantage of some of the most susceptible aspects of developing brains, even more so than maybe other forms of being on a screen?
Yeah, I think so, because of this is now kids are measuring their self-esteem, their self-worth, if people like them or not, and kind of basing it off of likes and views. And that's really hard. I think there's no way to avoid that completely. And so I would say just really partnering with your child in that, being a part of it, understanding what they're looking at, and kind of asking them questions about, how is that making them feel, or what information there and takeaways they're getting from those interactions, to just understand and kind of be part of it. I think where it gets really hard is when it's sort of like off, and something that you don't really have eyes of, or you're not a part of, that then you don't know how it's affecting them. So I think just really having that be something that is an open line of communication where you can really be a part of it.
So back to, next steps for parents. You have watched your kids observe their behavior. You kind of feel like, what, we're getting a little out of whack. We're getting out of equilibrium here in terms of what we think is healthy. What steps would you recommend parents take to get back to what is a normal, healthy relationship with their devices, their screens, their media networks, et cetera?
Yeah, so it's going to be starting small. It's like, okay, we're going to put it away for 5 or 10 minutes, or, depending on the level of where you need to start. But I think, and then also that as a parent, that you're going to model that too, right? This isn't going to just be a one-way thing that only the children have to do, but it's something that everyone does together as a family. So, thinking about, all right, what are we going to do instead? And I think it's hard to take something out without replacing it with something else. So making sure that that's going to be replaced with, we're going to have in-person family game night, or we're going to all read a book, or we're going to go for a walk, whatever that is. But I think having a replacement, and then also building up to that. So it's like, today we're going to sit down and we're going to do this 10-minute, 15-minute thing together, and then kind of building up to that 30 minutes, and then maybe it's an hour. But I would just say my biggest thing would be for parents to not fear social media. I think it's something that can feel really scary, overwhelming. What do I do? What do I not do? And feel guilty of like, am I ruining my child by letting them use screens? And it's just understanding everything in moderation, being a part of that conversation with your kid, and knowing that you do need to be the one to kind of put some guardrails in place to protect them. But just knowing that it's not all good, it's not all bad. There is a happy medium, and it does take a little bit of effort to figure out what that is for each family.
Very cool. Well, I've got my work cut out for me getting this whittled down to 1:45, but I look forward to it. And I really, really appreciate your expertise and your insight. This is a fascinating topic, I think, that goes along with all the other digital parenting stuff we've been discussing.
Yeah, so important. I'm glad that you're covering it, and it was a pleasure to do. Well, thank you.
Cool. Thanks for your time today.
Look forward to it. All
All right.
right,
Appreciate
take
it.
care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.